Hi there, and welcome to Heard Online, a series of episodes where we take a critical look at things that we hear online when it comes to sleep or insomnia. And today we're trying something new. We're actually going to do a Heard Online episode on a video that is right here on YouTube. And I want to thank B181123 for the suggestion in the comment sections. I think it was actually yesterday. B181123 suggested an episode where Matthew Walker talks with Lex Friedman, and my first reaction as I replied to the comment was that I think I personally might be quite triggered by looking at this video, and as I also said, that often is an invitation. Like we're seeing, like when something's triggering us, we're kind of a little scared of something. Often that's the way we should go. So I was like, okay, let me give it a shot. The second thing I was a little bit worried about was when I did this really, really nice episode with Sierra, where we talked about SpongeBob. I recorded the whole episode with videos from SpongeBob, but then when I uploaded it, there were these copyright infringement things, so we couldn't actually show the episodes, like the segments from SpongeBob. So I was a little bit afraid of that, but I tried ahead of this, so I think it should work. So what we're going to do is actually we're going to take a look at this interview and listen and hear what Matthew Walker has to say, and then I'll chip in with my thoughts. And it is a very long, it's a more than 2 hour long podcast interview, but luckily they have timestamps. So I thought we could look at two things: Matthew Walker's thoughts on why we sleep, as well as how to overcome insomnia. For those of you who know me, I don't use the word overcome because it implies kind of struggle, but that's the word they're using there. So I thought we could take a look at those things together. And we'll start with about 6 minutes into the video. There's a question of kind of like the broad question of like, Matthew Walker, why do we sleep? Like, what's the function of sleep? Why do we sleep? Let's take a listen from there.
Crave sleep then? Why do we sleep? How can we begin to answer that question then? So I think one of the ways that I think about this, or one of the answers that came to me, is the following. The reason that we implode so quickly and so thoroughly with insufficient sleep is because human beings seem to be one of the few species that will deliberately deprive themselves of sleep for no apparent good reason.
So just a quick comment here. Like when I saw this, my first reaction was, well, the question is, why do we sleep? And Matthew Walker here immediately goes into like insinuating that it's harmful and terrible and bad if we don't sleep, without even asking the question, like without even trying to answer the question. That was my first reaction. Then I was like, okay, let's see where this goes. I just want to comment on that.
Biological. Mm-hmm. And what that led me then to was the following. Mother Nature, as a consequence, so no other species does what we do in that context. There are a few species that do undergo sleep deprivation, but for very obvious, clear biological reasons. One is when they're in a condition of severe starvation. The second is when they're caring for their newborn. So, for example, killer whales will often deprive themselves. The female will go away from the pod, give birth, and then bring the calf back. And during that time, the mother will undergo sleep deprivation. And then the third one is during migration, when birds are flying transoceanographic 3,000 miles. But for the most part, it's never seen in the animal kingdom. Which brings me back to the point, therefore, Mother Nature, in the course of evolution, has never had to face the challenge of this thing called sleep deprivation. And therefore, she has never created a safety net in place to circumnavigate this common influence. And there's a good example where we have, which is called the adipose cell, the fat cell. Because during our evolutionary past, we had famine and we had feast. And Mother Nature came up with a very clever recipe, which is, how can I store caloric credit so that I can spend it when I go into debt? And the fat cell was born. Brilliant idea. Where is the fat cell for sleep? Where is that sort of banking chip for sleep? And unfortunately, we don't seem to have one because she's never had to face that challenge. So
this really was quite striking to me. Firstly, there is no answer to the question. Matthew Walker does not answer the question of why we sleep, but instead goes into this this line of thinking that sleep deprivation is completely unique to humans, and we are just like, our bodies are just not prepared for it. Our bodies just don't know what to do. So again, hasn't answered the question, but just shares these thoughts that are very triggering and very very scary to hear. Um, and then the claim that there is no sleep deprivation in the animal kingdom, is, well, firstly, he shares that that's not the case. There are certain times where birds, for example, very very much sleep deprive themselves, right? And uh, and the other question becomes, how do we know that? Like, what do we know about the animal kingdom? Like, there's so many insects and birds and mammals and all kinds of things. How do we know that they don't sleep deprive themselves? Well, I think, yeah, sure. First, I just want to sort of question that. But secondly, yes, it's true that, of course, a fish wouldn't be like, oh, like, I want to watch some Netflix even if I'm sleepy. Like, they wouldn't do that, right? That's true. But again, there's no evidence whatsoever that that's harmful. And again, like, what really stood out to me is that there is no answer to the question. What I think is the truth here is that yes, we our brains are always taking in information, like sounds and visual, everything we touch, feel, hear, etc., is information, right? That has to be processed in some way. And when we sleep, that is when the brain sort of gets rid of memories that it doesn't need, right? So it's sort of like a pruning of memory process. It's also a safety thing. We are a diurnal species. We are not as safe when we are wandering out in the dark where there are predators like panthers with big eyes, etc. So those are the reasons I believe that sleep exists for. But Matthew Walker doesn't even talk about that, although he probably must have heard of these, like, the common reasons why we sleep. But instead, he just goes into what I call fear-mongering. You really, like, I don't know what his intent is, but instead of answering the question why we sleep, he immediately goes into, like, talking about how sleep deprivation is something we're not even prepared for, which is so unhelpful, because, like, what are we supposed to do with that information if we happen to believe him? Like, it's just very triggering, and quite typical of a lot of other things I've heard and read from Matthew Walker. So that was the first thing I wanted to share. And then the other one was, it was quite interesting because in the timestamps, which, by the way, am I sharing this with you? Yeah, I'm sharing this with you. All the timestamps are here. And I saw this one, How to Overcome Insomnia, and I thought that could be an interesting.
You said you suffered through several bouts of insomnia. Is there, aside from embracing your chronotype, is there advice you can give how to overcome insomnia from your own experience?
Right now, the best method that we have is something called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBT-I for short. And you work with, for the people who don't know what it is, you work with a therapist for maybe 6 weeks. And you can do it online, by the way. I would recommend probably jumping online. It's just the easiest. And it will change your beliefs, your habits, your behaviors, and your general stress around this thing called sleep. And it is just as effective as sleeping pills in the short term. But what's great is that, unlike sleeping pills, when you stop working with your therapist, those benefits last for years later. Whereas when you stop your sleeping pills, you typically have what's called rebound insomnia, where your sleep not only goes back to being as bad as it was before, it's usually even worse. Mm-hmm. For me, I think I found a number of things effective. The first is that I had to really address what was stressful and try to come up with some degree of meaningful rationality around it. Because I think one of the things that happens, there's something very, talking about conscious states, to come all the way back to, I don't know. I feel like we've only been chatting for like 20 minutes, but you're going to tell me it's been a while. Yeah, it's been a while.
Okay, I feel terribly sorry. But let's come back to conscious states, which is where we started.
Yeah.
There is something very strange about the night, that thoughts and anxieties are not the same as they are in the waking day. They are worse, they are bigger. And I at least find that I am far more likely to catastrophize and ruminate at night about things, that when I wake up the next day in the broad light of day, I think, it's nowhere near that bad, Matt. What were you doing? It's not that bad at all. Yeah. So to gain, firstly, some rational understanding of my emotional state that's causing that insomnia was very helpful. Yeah. The second thing was to keep regularity, just going to bed at the same time, waking up. And here's an unconventional piece of sleep advice. After a bad night of sleep, do nothing. Don't wake up any later. Don't go to bed any earlier. Don't nap during the day. And don't drink any more coffee than you would otherwise. Because if you end up sleeping later into the morning, you're then not going to be tired at your normal time at night. So then you're going to get into bed thinking, well, I had a terrible night of sleep last night. And yes, I slept in this morning to try and compensate, but I'm still going to get to bed at my normal time. But now you get into bed and you haven't been awake for as long as you normally would. So you're not as sleepy as you normally would be. And so now you sit there lying in bed and it's another bad night. And the same.
All right, we will pause there, and there are actually 4 things I really want to talk about when, from this segment. Number 1 is when Matthew Walker says, like with CBT-I, you learn how to not be so stressed out about sleep anymore, and that just kind of blows your mind when you have the same person like spending probably out of this interview, I would say probably half of it, probably like an hour, is basically making you really scared of not sleeping, implying that if you don't sleep, it's going to be terrible for like your health, your immune system, your mood regulation, like all kinds of things. And then saying like with CBT, you learn how to not stress out about sleep so much. That just blows your mind. Like how can you say those 2 things in the same interview? Like that just blows my mind. That's the first thing. Second thing is, Matthew Walker talks about CBT-I, which is sort of like the gold standard, and says that as opposed to sleeping pills, the effect lasts for years. And I'm a firm believer of education. Like with CBT-I, like the good thing about CBT-I is education and understanding that sleeping less, sleeping little, insomnia, sleep deprivation, none of that has ever been shown to cause any health problems. That can be really helpful. And that education you have with you for years. This said, the understanding of CBT-I is like very confused in my opinion. There's this kind of like implied controllability. And you can see this in Matthew Walker's thinking as well. He says that when he says that, okay, I'm going to give you this unconventional advice, then you kind of listen up. You're like, oh, what's he going to talk about? And he's like, do nothing. Then you're like, wow, Matthew Walker really gets it. But then you see that his thinking is by doing nothing, you get up at the same time, and then you're sleepy enough at the same time in the evening, so you will still sleep, which is this like sleep drive idea that is the center of CBT-I, which is basically that insomnia is just it just happens because we're not sleepy enough. So if you just get up early and you go to bed late, then you'll be sleepy, you'll have the strong sleep drive, and that will make you sleep, which shows that it's a very simplistic understanding of insomnia. It's like it lacks the foundational insight that insomnia is a form of anxiety and fear. It's not a sleep drive problem. So that's what I heard when that's what I thought when I heard that. Now, then, Matthew Walker says something that I think resonates with all of us humans, which is that oftentimes during the night, we can be really scared and stressed out and catastrophize. And then in the day, we're like, why was I so worried about that? Like there's the difference between how we approach things in the night and in the day. And going back to like why we sleep, right? If Matthew Walker had, shared this common understanding that part of why we sleep is just to be safe when it's dark outside, and we are diurnal species, we're not designed for being out in the dark, then that leads us to understand why we can be quote unquote irrational at night, because we're designed to be afraid of the night to some degree, to be cautious at night, to be less rational and more reactive, more kind of like on edge at night. So the understanding of why we sleep also leads to an understanding of why we can more easily get caught in these like worries at night. And I think that wasn't really clear from what he said. And I felt there was a final thing I wanted to, the final thing I want to add was just that, again, if CBT-I was so great, then why is it that in our latest book, Tales of Courage, with one exception, everyone who tried CBT-I actually had more struggle, more anxiety because of all the rules and the rigid system that it is. So I know this was like a 2-hour interview that I could easily spend like 8 hours like reviewing and going over this 2-hour interview, but I think this will suffice for now. I hope this was helpful to everybody in the audience. I think we hit the most important points of this interview. And, I want to say to everyone that has come across Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, then please check out Alexei Guz's essay on Why We Sleep. I made a typo there, saying Why We Sleep. Alexei Guz basically has debunked this book. He took the first chapter and took a critical look at it, and it's just filled with misleading statements. There's actually graphs that are purposely like cut to support like these ideas that we sleep less over time, and there's a lot of errors in Why We Sleep. And you can all, if you feel like, you can also check out my book, Why We Don't Sleep, which I wrote also as a reply to Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, which again has been debunked, and I don't think there's any validity in the vast majority of the ideas that are presented in that book. And finally, of course, if you have been scared of not sleeping, and you've developed this kind of ongoing struggle with insomnia that comes from the fear of being awake, the fear of not sleeping, and if you find everything you need on this channel, including debunking videos like this one, that's amazing. Let us know. But if you would like a curated curriculum, and you want some guidance and support, then please head over to our website, the Sleep Coach School. We can really help you, and we'd love a chance to work with you. So head over there if you need a little bit more support on your way to sleeping peacefully for the rest of your life. With that said, I will end now, and let me know what you thought, as always, in the comments, and I'll look forward to having you back real soon. Until then, take it easy.